I'm no
that conspiracy theorists love. And it all started with the Freemasons. To this day, no one knows for sure how Freemasonry got its start. It may have begun in the English and Scottish guilds of stonemasons in the Middle Ages. Some historians say its roots stretch back to ancient Egypt. The Masons used the idea of building to stand for self-improvement and freedom.
By freedom, we mean freedom of speech, of course, freedom of religion, but also, Masonically, we're speaking of freedom from ignorance.
In the 18th century, Freemasons met secretly to discuss freedom and democracy.
They were talking about things and advocating things that would be definitely seen as a threat to the existing order.
The Freemasons used code to communicate. An honest person was on the level. An old Freemason line that's now everyday speech.
They used the language of symbolism to convey certain truths, ideas, and principles, knowing that only the initiated, that is, only the person who would dig deeper and really want to know, would understand what we're talking about.
With all that talk about freedom, it's no surprise that some of America's founding fathers, including George Washington and Ben Franklin, were well-known Freemasons. But after the American Revolution, the Freemasons themselves came under suspicion from a nervous public.
Some people started questioning, saying, my God, you know, look at these guys, they're all over the place. What is happening here? They meet in lodges, in secret. What do they talk about?
So what did all this have to do with Lady Liberty? By the time the statue was proposed, Freemasons were in disrepute. There was no room for secret societies in democracy. Today, conspiracy theorists insist the Freemasons' involvement gave the entire enterprise a sinister meaning. But what about the design of the statue herself? Is there a Masonic connection there? Well, 300 feet over New York Harbor, she holds a torch, a favorite symbol of enlightenment for the Freemasons.
We're basically making a statement that we stand guard to make sure that the light of knowledge will never be extinguished in the future. That's the symbolism behind it.
But this design, a lady with a torch, was a personal favorite of Bartholdi's. He liked it so much that he'd been trying to get a statue like this built for years. He first tried to convince Egypt the lady should stand in the Suez Canal. The Egyptians turned him down. So when he got the chance to build a colossal statue for America, he went back to his old idea. This time, the Colossus would be called Liberty Enlightening the World. And under her robes would be, yes, another link to Freemasons.
Underneath her skin, so to speak, is this wonderful skeleton framework that holds her in place. And it's a fantastic design made by Gustav Eiffel.
Eiffel, of Eiffel Tower fame, was, you guessed it, a prominent Freemason. Adding more fuel to the theory that the statue was some sort of Masonic plot, on August 5th, 1884, a ceremony was carried out on the island where the statue was going to stand. A group of Freemasons carried out a bizarre ritual involving corn, oil, and wine, which symbolized prosperity, peace, and happiness.
The New York State Freemasons all came out to the island, to Bedloe's Island here, and they carried on their ceremony. And it was considered a very sacred kind of a blessing to the Statue of Liberty.
Even beyond the conspiracy theories, there were plenty of Americans who wanted nothing to do with the French gift on religious grounds.
There were Christian groups that protested against this, and particularly the Roman Catholic Church was very upset.
They pointed out that the Roman goddess Libertas was an actual deity in ancient times.
They were concerned that America was going to worship a Roman goddess in America, in the harbor, and they were forgetting that this is purely symbolic. It's not a real goddess.
The protests got nowhere. and the statue was formally dedicated with great hoopla in 1886. She quickly became the most famous statue in America, if not the world. But she still has a few misunderstood parts. Above her stern face, the statue wears a crown or diadem. Above that, a halo. Nearly everyone confuses the two.
You know, we always talk about the crown of the statue, and people mistakenly think that the 7 rays out of the head is the crown. That's not the crown. That's just a halo.
25 windows provide a view of Manhattan and the Atlantic Ocean. Historians have looked to find some secret significance to their number and location.
They're supposed to symbolize like jewels or gems. Like any crown of any prince or king or queen, there are going to be jewels, but it's just a crown.
Sometimes a crown is just a crown, and a halo really is just a halo.
In her right hand, of course, she holds aloft a magnificent torch.
That torch is a symbol for illumination. It's a symbol for wisdom. It's a symbol for knowledge. And that is what America is carrying in its right hand.
Washington, D.C., headquarters of the free world. And as any tourist can tell you, it's a confusing place to navigate. Credit or blame starts with the man who gave the city its name. He also gave the city its location. George Washington himself picked this site on the banks of the Potomac.
We're immediately above that part of the original District of Columbia that was known as the Federal City.
Conspiracy theorists are absolutely sure that Washington's street plan is riddled with Masonic and even satanic symbols. But are pentagrams, Masonic squares, and the number 666 really part of the Capitol's DNA? You'd think you could get the answer from the man who designed the city, Pierre L'Enfant. But there's a small problem.
There's all kinds of room for speculation about what the plan means because, as L'Enfant's records, his papers disappeared.
And without those papers, there's no way to know the truth. Pierre L'Enfant was one of many Frenchmen who came to America to fight for the colonies in the Revolutionary War. During the war, L'Enfant became friends with the commander-in-chief. After the war in 1783, both became founding members of a very elite group called the Society of Cincinnati. It's still around, headquartered here at the Anderson House in Washington, D.C.
The society was organized as a brotherhood of the officers who had won the American Revolution.
Its goal? Preserve the ideals of that revolution. The society took its name from Cincinnatus, a Roman hero who commanded the empire's armies without pay. He also refused any kind of political power, an appealing story to revolutionaries fighting British tyranny.
He was a person of great inspiration to the heroes of the Revolution, and Washington modeled his own conduct on that of Cincinnatus.
Membership was and is open only to men who served as officers in the Continental Army and their descendants. Even today, the membership list is a well-guarded secret. 200 years ago, many Americans saw the society as the embodiment of everything true patriots were fighting against. Why should the son of a general have a noble title just because his father did?
There was a great deal of fear in the United States that the society was some kind of aristocratic conspiracy to subvert American liberty. It forced the society to close its meetings and to become a much more private, a much more even secretive organization than it had been.
One society member's journal shows just how far the group had to go to protect itself.
We have here a journal kept in code, completely unintelligible, unless you have the key to it, which he's pasted into the front of the book later.
The first president of this secret society, George Washington, who already belonged to that other closed circle we've been talking about, the Freemasons.
There's a rich overlap between 18th century Freemasonry and the Society of the Cincinnati, and indeed many of the founding members of the society were Masons.
Joining the society alongside Washington, Pierre L'Enfant. The Frenchman was put in charge of designing the organization's emblems, including this rarely seen eagle, studded with 194 precious stones, including 155 diamonds. Believe it or not, it's still worn by the Society's president.
Washington's diamond eagle is sometimes regarded as the crown jewel of America. It's the most elaborate jewel that survives from the 18th century.
L'Enfant was making quite a name for himself. So in 1791, when it came time to choose the man who would design the city, who better than an architect who belonged to a secret club with the president? L'Enfant's plan paid special attention to the natural landscape. One of his first decisions was to place the future Congress House high up on a hill. He then put the White House to its northwest on lower ground to symbolize that the people and their Congress are more powerful than the president. The Supreme Court was supposed to go in between to balance them out. But the High Court didn't end up there, and it all boiled down to money. Congress just didn't feel a building was necessary for a court that at the time only met twice a year. Not until the 1930s did the court get its own home, right behind the Capitol. But the White House and Congress still sit, keeping an eye on each other, from opposite ends of Pennsylvania Avenue. DC's unique geometry has made it tricky to navigate, and many believe that the street plan contains Masonic symbols, like a compass and square. Masons see it differently.
Yes, geometry is important to Masonry, but also geometry is the language of reason. The city, it's a square. We say it's a fair and square, square deal. So the square is a symbol of equality, rectitude, wisdom.
Did L'Enfant intend it this way? Without his original notes, his real intention to this day is a mystery. And there are those who see something truly scary in a map of DC. Looking at the site of the White House, by outlining the angled streets to its north, you can form a pentagram, a sign of the devil, pointing directly at the president's home.
The fundamentalists have had a real heyday taking a look at the White House and tying it into Satan and the darker aspect of things.
And a few blocks north, something even more chilling. These three traffic circles, DuPont, Scott, and Logan, when seen from above, look like they form the number 666. The number of the devil. Well, yes, but...
You can look at the streets in many different ways. You can connect corners here and there and come up with any kind of, almost any type of shape that you want. It is really baloney.
Once again, if we only had Pierre's original notes, we'd all know for sure. And they might well still be around if he hadn't had such an erratic personality. In the fall of 1791, just a few months after L'Enfant finished his plan, he refused to make it available to the city commissioners. He thought the city was his masterpiece. The commissioners just wouldn't appreciate it.
No, we'll stay.
He then made matters worse by tearing down the home of a powerful Washingtonian, just because it happened to stand in the way of his plan for New Jersey Avenue.
It was the classic fight between the artist and the commissioners responsible to the taxpayers. L'Enfant quit, he wasn't fired, and he actually ended up accusing the commissioners of stealing his papers. But in any case, they disappeared, and they haven't been seen for over 200 years.
L'Enfant ended up unemployed and broke. And when he died in 1825, he was buried in an unmarked grave on a local plantation in the slave section. A final insult. Years after his death, L'Enfant's genius was finally recognized. In 1908, President Theodore Roosevelt ordered L'Enfant's bones moved to Arlington Cemetery. But whether they were the right bones, that's the final mystery of Pierre L'Enfant.
The man that supervised their being dug up was a doctor, yet he never took measurements of the bones. He just stated that we were absolutely certain that we had the bones of L'Enfant. From the nature of his statement, it's always been a question to me as to who is buried in L'Enfant's grave.
It's held more secrets than any other house in America. If these walls could talk, they'd have plenty to tell. Its history takes in fire, destruction, disappearances, and ghosts. And like so many American icons, the White House is tied up in conspiracy theories involving the Masons. It's a sign of how deeply Americans believe in democracy. Anything that seems anti-democratic must be something sinister.
But there was always a problem with an institution like the Masons. It was a secret society, namely, you could only know of its rituals and its activities if you were a member, and the members were pledged not to tell anyone.
Secret societies didn't bother the father of our country. In 1792, Freemason George Washington chose another fellow Freemason to design a house fit for the president, Irish architect James Hoban. His plan was based on a building in Dublin that now houses the Irish Parliament.
The house that George Washington wanted built is this beautiful, symmetrical house that you see before you.
A beautiful house built by Masons, who went so far as to set up their secret camp nearby while it was being built.
While they were building the White House, they were actually right here in front of the White House, this whole area called Lafayette Park. They had a makeshift lodge, and in the evening, they would hold their Masonic meetings.
In 1793, the Freemason workers building the new Capitol set up the District of Columbia's Federal Lodge No. 1. Heading up the closed society meetings, White House architect James Hoban. The cornerstone of the White House was laid on October 13, 1792, with a Masonic ceremony very much like this one celebrating its bicentennial. It featured not just Masonic tools, but corn and oil and wine.
Corn is a symbol of abundance and prosperity. Oil is a symbol of peace. And wine stands for happiness. And the idea behind the ceremony is to remind the president, whoever is going to live in that place, that his job is not to rule over people, but to serve the people and work for the propagation of the prosperity, the peace, and happiness of the people.
Noble sentiments. But today, that White House cornerstone is part of an enduring national mystery because it disappeared.
The cornerstone of the White House has gone missing. We don't really know exactly where it is.
One theory, it was somehow lost when the British set fire to the city in 1814, damaging the White House. Another, that it vanished during one of the building's many renovations. To this day, no one knows what happened to it. But the White House has also given up some of its secrets over the years. In the 1950s, workers made an amazing discovery deep within the White House. It happened when Harry Truman ordered a major renovation after the aging building nearly collapsed around him.
They literally gutted the White House. In the process, they found a lot of the original stones that Freemasons had put their mark, their Masonic mark.
Those original stone masons who built the White House came from Scotland. Many of them were also Freemasons, who had a tradition of marking their work. Nobody is really sure what the Masonic signatures mean. They probably indicate payment for a certain Mason, how the stone should be laid, or the location of the job. President Truman, yet another presidential Freemason, gave these unique stones to the Masonic lodges across the country as a remembrance of those workers. The original construction of the White House took about 8 years. Total cost, about $200,000. A lot of money at the time. Part of that cost was due to its stone construction.
George Washington is insisting on the house being of stone for permanence. That's an important symbolic message right there.
That decision also paved the way for the mansion's nickname, which had nothing to do with the paint job the building got after the British burned it in 1814.
The real reason the White House is white is because when the Scottish stonemasons finished the construction of the walls, they sealed them with a whitewash that they had created out of rice and other kinds of materials.
Teddy Roosevelt's the one who made the name official in 1901. As far as truly secret goings-on inside the White House, there may be a few links to these long-ago mysteries. The ghosts who are said to haunt its halls.
There's lots of interesting ghost stories that have been written about the White House, and my theory is it's always got to be a famous president. You don't have ghost stories about Grover Cleveland.
Well, the most popular ghost is Abraham Lincoln. For almost a century, presidents, first ladies, and guests have claimed they saw Lincoln or felt his presence. One of the first eyewitness reports from President Calvin Coolidge's wife, Grace. She said she'd seen a shocking image in the Oval Office. Lincoln standing at the window. Some of the ghost stories simply don't make sense. Like the one that has President James Madison's glamorous wife, Dolly, wandering in ghostly form around the White House rose garden. One problem.
That side of the house actually, during Madison's time, was a courtyard for a stable.
And if the White House ghosts are in any long-lost conspiracies, they're not talking. Even though the White House was built to last, as the nation expanded to the west, some people thought the president's home should also go west. Here's a 1911 design for a summer White House in Colorado.
It was to be the Western White House in the Rockies. This sort of modeled on the great castle of Ludwig of Bavaria, but peculiarly it seems inappropriate in scale and style for an American president.
The plan for a White House out west was soon abandoned. Other plans like this Imperial Palace also went nowhere. But some proposals made the cut. President Theodore Roosevelt added a widely misunderstood White House symbol, the West Wing.
If you watch the West Wing television show, then you might be under the impression that the West Wing is actually in the White House proper. It is not. It is actually added on the west side, and it's like an annex connected to the house via a terrace or colonnade.
The president's office was moved to the West Wing to accommodate Roosevelt's large and loud family.
You had just pandemonium up there with that many people. So what they did is they built a temporary office structure for the president. That annex would quickly evolve, and by 1909 would be doubled in size, and the first Oval Office was built. And that was for President Taft.
Today, this building's grace and symmetry are still perhaps the greatest message the White House has to convey.
If you were to draw a line right down the middle, everything is perfectly balanced on either side of that line. And that connotes also a kind of conservative strength and a sense of permanence.
It's a national emblem that's thrived for more than 2 centuries. The American flag has changed its looks over the years, but never lost its iconic power. The historic flag raising at Iwo Jima sent an image of victory around the world. During the Vietnam War, its connotations divided the nation. On 9/11, it rose above the rubble as a symbol of hope.
You know, given this unique and strong feeling that we have for our flag, it's really interesting to me how the early history of the flag is just so murky. The origins of the flag, the very essence of it, is a historical mystery.
The legend? Betsy Ross, a Revolutionary War widow, was asked by George Washington to design a flag. Except, that's not what happened.
We don't know who made the first American flag, the Betsy Ross myth notwithstanding. She was a flag maker in Philadelphia, But there's no historical evidence that buttress this legend.
So what can we say about the flag?
Most people don't realize that the American flag is the first national flag on the planet that represents people. Most other flags represented monarchs and that type of thing.
Leaders have been using cloth as a national symbol since the Middle Ages, but it's a long way from those banners to Old Glory. That story starts back in England, where King James I declared that all English ships should fly this flag. It's the Union Jack, made by combining the crosses of St. George and St. Andrew. By 1634, the Union Jack had made its way across the Atlantic to Massachusetts Bay Colony. It's possible that it may have influenced the future American flag, but no one is sure.
As far as where the colors came from, we have an educated guess, and that is from the Union Jack.
By the mid-1700s, the colonies were rebelling against Britain, and the Americans were coming up with flags of their own. This flag stemmed from an article by Ben Franklin calling for America to send rattlesnakes to England. The snake became a symbol of resistance with the not-too-subtle motto, "Don't tread on me." This message is still around today. Since 2002, all Navy ships fly this flag in response to terrorism. But the first flag that could really be called American is a bit older than the country itself. On January 1st, 1776, George Washington ordered this flag to fly on Prospect Hill near Boston. He wanted to mark the birth of the Continental Army.
You know, the first official American flag, which predates the Stars and Stripes, and that is the Continental colors, also known as the Grand Union flag.
But nobody has any idea where it came from or what it means.
The stripes, really it's not specifically known beyond symbolizing the original 13 colonies where they came from. There's a lot of different ideas about it, that the idea for the stripes was actually taken from designs of signal flags.
But this flag wasn't actually used in battle during the Revolutionary War.
Some of them had stars and stripes and the stars in the canton, as we're familiar with, like the Bennington flag. You've seen that one with the number 76 spelled out. So it's a myth that we fought the war under the stars and stripes.
That myth has its roots in paintings, like Washington crossing the Delaware. Instead, the Revolutionary War was fought mostly under unit and regimental flags like this one.
You can see it has the Great Seal of the United States embroidered on it. The American Army actually did not carry the Stars and Stripes in battle all the way until the Mexican War.
One year later, in 1777, the Congress passed an official flag resolution that included Stars and Stripes. Just one sentence long.
It's only one line in the annals of the Continental Congress. That's all we know for certain.
It says the flag should have 13 stripes, alternate red and white, and 13 stars, white in a blue field. But how to arrange them? They don't say.
We had thousands of different arrangements of the stars. We had stars 5-pointed, 6-pointed, 7-pointed, and sometimes even 8-pointed stars.
Today, we know there's one stripe for each of the 13 colonies and one star for every state. But the colors? No idea.
People commented that the blue may have symbolized courage or perseverance, and that the white might have symbolized the purity of the cause. Red might have symbolized the sacrifice made during the war.
But there's another thing most people don't realize. The flag that's everywhere on the 4th of July, Memorial Day, Veterans Day, wasn't always such a popular symbol. It wasn't the flag of the people until the middle of the 1800s.
Back then, the flag was primarily used by the government, primarily by the military, and primarily by the Navy for signaling and communications purposes. Now, this all changed, and it's a very rare thing in history when something changes almost overnight.
That night was April 12, 1861. Confederate forces bombed Fort Sumter, tearing the country apart. As the Civil War began, people in the North wanted a way to show their true colors.
When the American flag came down at Fort Sumter, it went up in the north. And sure enough, if you read people's letters, journals, diary entries, if you read the newspaper accounts, where there were no flags, it was very rare for an individual to fly a flag. Almost as soon as the word got up to Boston and Philadelphia and other places in the north, the flag came out everywhere.
The funny thing about the flag, it's the icon Americans care the most about, but know the least about.
I couldn't find any other country who had, well, a national anthem to their flags, patriotic societies, veterans groups, Flag Day holiday, what's been called the cult of the flag, almost religious feelings. It's such an emotional thing. How ironic that the early history of the flag is just filled with mysteries that we just don't know the answers to.
They say money makes the world go round. If that's the case, then this is the axis the world is spinning on. The U.S. Bureau of Engraving and Printing in Washington, D.C. Designers and engravers here use secret symbols all the time, honoring the nation's history and keeping an eye on something just as important, the safety and security of the almighty buck.
It's amazing to me that somebody in China will recognize an American bill as an American bill, and that's because of its iconic nature. It had icons on it that are instantly recognizable as American.
Engravers like Dixie March get things started by carving out the designs by hand, backwards. 100 years ago, elaborate engravings were enough to foil counterfeiters. Not anymore. Now new technology is called for, most of it top secret. Here's what we can tell you. Starting in 1996, the Treasury brought out new currency designs, or NCD for short. One of the secret weapons against counterfeiting, microprinting.
Microprinting is just what it sounds like. Very, very, very tiny print. You can see it with a microscope or some sort of magnifying glass.
The most important weapon against counterfeiters? Change. The government redesigns our nation's currency every 7 to 10 years to stay ahead of the people trying to make the fakes.
The point here is to make sure that we protect the integrity of U.S. currency. And we know you can go pretty much anywhere in the world today and buy something with a U.S. note. That's because people have trust and confidence that that piece of paper is what it says it is.
But there's a widespread belief that the symbols on our money are filled with mystery and conspiracy. The symbol that tops all others is this one right here on the back of the buck. The two-sided Great Seal of the United States. You've heard of it, but do you know what it really is? And what dark secrets are supposedly embedded in its design? Here's the actual Great Seal, highly protected inside the U.S. State Department.
And it's locked, so we have a padlock.
Think of it as the tool of a high-end notary, used to authenticate treaties and presidential appointments.
And then once the seal is affixed, it is a final commission to be presented to the appointee.
The lone eye hovering over a pyramid on one side, the eagle clutching a claw full of arrows on the other, and not one but 3 Latin mottos. No wonder it's irresistible to conspiracy theorists. Let's look at their dark theories. They start here in Philadelphia. On July 4th, 1776, the Continental Congress appointed a committee to design a seal, a literal seal of approval for all official documents.
If you can imagine that hot day in July when they were trying to pull together the Declaration of Independence that day, although they had done this remarkably important thing, they had to have the seal.
On the committee, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, and Thomas Jefferson. The same 3 men whose job it was to produce the Declaration itself.
These men were very brilliant. They didn't really have the best idea of how a seal should look.
Franklin wanted Moses standing on the shore, extending his hand over the Red Sea. Here's Jefferson's original choice of design: the children of Israel in the wilderness. And Adams lobbied for a painting of the young Hercules. Eventually, the three gave up. They hired an actual artist, Eugene Dussemetier, to come up with a plan. Some features of that original design remain today. One of them, that strange floating eye.
The eye in a triangle, we know, is a symbol for providence, the deity, the supreme being.
You can't get away from anything if God is watching you. This is a very important symbol if you're trying to be a strong and just nation.
And the eye is also an important symbol for, yes, Freemasons. For them, it represents the all-seeing eye of God. For the conspiracy-minded, there has to be a more sinister explanation.
They look at the pyramid and the eye in the triangle, and the eye in the triangle, they say, hey, that's Satan's eye. That's the devil's eye. And who gave it to us? The Freemasons gave it to us. Therefore, the Freemasons have to be Satanists.
The Masons did not really participate in making the seal at all. Benjamin Franklin was the only Mason, and his design wasn't used.
Another of the artist's ideas that stuck is the phrase e pluribus unum, Latin for out of many, one. Today we think of it as a high-minded idea, but in fact, it's a line out of 200-year-old pop culture.
It came from a magazine called the Gentleman's Magazine, and every year they would take one article from each of the 12 issues and make like an omnibus volume that would become from many one. So that was e pluribus unum. And Dussemetier, he probably read the Gentleman's Magazine and came up with this idea.
It's the very first symbol ever created for the United States. The Great Seal. And with its strange floating eye, it was fodder for conspiracy theories from the start. But Congress didn't approve of this first sketch. So in 1780, they set up a committee to give the seal another try. They turned to an artist named Francis Hopkinson. Hopkinson added the 13 red and white stripes on a shield, as well as a constellation of 13 stars.
The 13 stripes representing the 13 states, and of course the bar across the top representing the federal government that ties the 13 states together.
So far, so good. But here is where a coincidence of American history provides a breeding ground for conspiracy theorists. 13, the number of original American colonies, is widely seen as a number representing evil or the devil.
And of course, these aren't satanic stars, as we're being told by certain fundamentalists, but actually the 13 states. That's what they represented.
But Congress didn't approve this design either. The next person to try and make sense of the seal, William Barton, an expert on badges and coats of arms. Barton added an eagle, as well as one of the seal's most controversial symbols, an unfinished pyramid below the weird all-seeing eye.
It's sort of cut off, truncated, and that symbolizes the work of a nation is never done. So the United States will constantly keep working on its democracy, working to become a better, a stronger nation.
We also know that the pyramid, to them, the Founding Fathers, was strength and duration. It was, they wanted to found a country that was going to last forever.
In June of 1783, the Secretary of the Congress, Charles Thompson, created yet another design. First, he made the eagle bigger and changed it to a bird native to North America.
The only way we can make ours specifically American is we choose the bald eagle, this eagle that has a white head, that's therefore more distinctive.
This version also added 2 more Latin phrases. The motto, Annuit Coeptus, means God has favored our undertakings. And Novus Ordo Seclorum, below the pyramid, which means a new order for the ages. Yet another aspect of the seal that's tailor-made for conspiracy theorists.
Now, the new order of the ages was a representative form of government, a republic. That's what that was about. Unfortunately, a whole group of other fundamentalists say, hey, no, that's not what it says. It's obvious what it says. This is the new world order.
But beyond Big Brother watching, there are even deeper secrets hidden in the seal, if you believe the conspiracy theorists. For example, they say that if you place a hexagram over the back of the seal, it points to 5 letters in the Latin phrases, the letters that spell Mason. Today, you're most likely to encounter the seal in your wallet on the dollar bill. But how did this strange emblem full of so many obscure symbols and conspiratorial ideas get there? It was put there by Freemasons. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a Mason, had it placed on the buck in 1935. Historians say the idea came from his Secretary of Agriculture, Henry Wallace, also a Mason. At the time, the seal had faded into obscurity. It was used to ratify treaties, but the average American had never even heard of it. But Wallace showed it to Roosevelt, and the president liked that phrase, Novus Ordo Seclorum, because it reminded him of his own New Deal. So he ordered the Bureau of Engraving and Printing to put the seal on the back of the $1 note. Conspiracy theorists love to claim that putting the seal there, with its eye and pyramid, was a secret gesture by FDR and his Mason brothers. Government officials beg to differ, pointing out that the seal by then was already more than 150 years old. So here's the official word. The Great Seal of the United States represents America as a new order for the ages, assembled from 13 parts. Looks out for our future, but is never completed, is watched over by God, who favors our undertakings, and is peaceful but willing to defend itself. Any questions? For more than 200 years, Americans have been creating symbols of what their country stands for, and then disagreeing about what those symbols mean. It's the American way. It's also our way of making sense out of the biggest ideas there are: equality, country, freedom.
Symbols are powerful. They convey messages over time to people in a greater and a more significant way than anything else.
These symbols stand for the traits, they stand for the virtues that the Founding Fathers were trying to embody.
But if these signs and symbols stand for America, why do they attract every conspiracy theorist looking for sinister meanings?
Human beings seem to be drawn to finding explanations for human existence in every aspect of it. And why shouldn't they be? You and I do it all the time. It's a natural inclination to find mystery and enjoyment and satisfaction in explaining events in that way.
For Americans, our national icons have spent more than 2 centuries gathering secret meanings and subversive theories about how they came to be. And we will be arguing about what these icons really mean for a long time to come.